Welcome to Heartbreak and Hope with Pat Barbarito, the show that explores how to build up or break down any relationship with confidence, clarity, and compassion. 50, I found, was a powerful age. Now I'm almost 68, so it was quite some time ago. There's just something about turning 50 that, well, I think it makes us realize that our next chapters are fewer. So many of our listeners and so many of my clients over the years have looked at that age as a critical point, a turning point in their lives. Lots of things happen in your 50s. Marriages end, health issues surface. A lot of women I know have bone density issues. We did an entire episode on this podcast about sex over 50 and 60, menopause, weight changes, appearance changes, and from my own experience, in my 50s, it was time to confront my past. When I entered my 50s, I really took the time to look back at my past, at my family of origin. I examined the decisions I made, and I made a decision that I was going to examine them in a healthy way. I entered into really good therapy, and I am grateful every day that I made the decision to embark on that journey. Now, of course, there's also a lot of joy we get in our first 50 years, right? I mean, we figure out who we are, we find our professional passion, we experience love in all different kinds of ways. Some of us have children, some of us even have grandchildren. But as is with life, heartbreak is woven into those times. My guest today is Maria Leonard Olsen. She has many stories to share about self-reflection, renewal, courage, and determination. Maria is inspiring, to say the least. Her book, 50 After 50, addresses the tools that we need to approach the next parts of our journey. Reading this book addresses overcoming personal struggles and owning your past, taking responsibility for your past. Maria Leonard Olsen is an author. She's an attorney, a public speaker, and a podcaster. She hosts the popular and extremely informative podcast, Becoming Your Best Version. She's led empowerment retreats for women, and as a biracial speaker, she has a unique perspective and an ability to connect with her audiences when she shares her stories of overcoming common battles, divorce, empty nest syndrome, work-life balance, sexual assault, anxiety, and much more. In her inspiring book, 50 After 50, Reframing the Next Chapter of Your Life, Maria shares intimate and painful details of how she numbed herself out of a 25-year marriage. As a successful lawyer, she struggled, as many of us do, with the role of motherhood and career, balancing the two. Realizing that her marriage was broken, she confronted her depression and decided to go on a new journey. So welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much, Pat, for having me.
Happy that you're here. I'm looking so forward to our conversation. You know, before we talk about many of the tools and advice that you have developed over the years, I'd like to talk about where it all began, your family of origin, because that, I believe, is a critical part of your story. Would you share with our audience about your family of origin, your parents, their history? Because it's quite interesting.
I completely agree with you. Almost everything we experience as a challenge in adulthood can be traced in some way to our childhood. I was unwilling to look at that connection for most of my life until my life fell apart at age 50. So my mother was an immigrant from the Philippines. She came to the U.S. in the early 1960s before the Civil Rights Movement, and the no colored signs that she confronted in Washington, D.C., where she settled to go to George Washington University to obtain her master's degree in finance. These signs sometimes applied to her and sometimes did not. She came to this country both to get an education, but also to escape her family of origin and to marry a white American. She has, like many people of color from developing nations, a complicated relationship with colorism and their meaning of success differs from mine. For her, coming to the US was coming to a place where the streets were paved with gold. She was going to marry a white man. She told me this so that she could have lighter skinned children, because in many parts of the world, especially in the Philippines, being lighter skin equated with being higher class. So she has had this burden her whole life, to the point where she sometimes says to me now, "You are so tan. You look like a field hand. What's wrong with you?" So I do not subscribe to colorism or her feelings on skin color, but I lived with that. So she married the first white man she could find. She was only 20, and she married a broken alcoholic, my birth certificate father. I say that because we probably will talk about how he was not my biological father, which I found out at age 53 by virtue of a consumer DNA test that was gifted to me. In any event, my dad, I loved him, but I was scared of him. He was an alcoholic. He was volatile. He was arrested for beating my mother, who he claimed, and may or may not be true, that she was cheating on him. But it was a chicken or the egg situation. He was violent. She maybe went to the arms of someone who wasn't violent. I will never know the truth, even though I suppose I could go read deposition transcripts from her acrimonious divorce, but I do not want to.
Did they stay married or were they divorced
No,
early on?
no, no. He got arrested for beating her when I was 6 years old, so 1969. And I should also mention that it was illegal for them to get married in the state of Maryland in 1962 because anti-miscegenation laws. Mixed marriages were illegal in 16 states, including Maryland and Virginia. Everyone thinks of Maryland as a very blue, very liberal state, but it is south of the Mason-Dixon line, and so it was illegal. So they went to D.C. to get married. The Philippines is the most Catholic country on the planet per capita. My dad was an Irish-American Army guy. They raised me and my brother Catholic. We were forced, I say, to go to Catholic school from first grade through even Jesuit college for me. I was very steeped in Catholicism. I became a Eucharistic minister when I was older. I raised my kids Catholic, even knowing that my son was gay. I just wanted them to have some religion, and my then husband was not observant, so he actually converted to Catholicism, much to the consternation of his Southern family.
How does that dynamic, the alcoholism, the colorism, the domestic abuse, how does that impact you as a young child? What context do you grow up in, and how does that impact who you evolve to be? Because that sounds like it's a lot of moving pieces that would have tremendous impact on a young girl.
Absolutely. There was no trusted adult in my early childhood. None. I basically feel that I raised my little brother. I was very, very protective of him. He was less than a year younger than I am, and he's still less than a year younger than I am. I was so scared for him and for me growing up in that volatile household. And because my dad is white, and this is 1969 when they separated, he got custody of us. I do not know how a man who beat his wife and was arrested for it got custody of us. I still don't know the answer to that because my mom, who lives in denial, will not discuss it.
Did you
Yes.
develop a relationship with your mother or keep a relationship with your mother?
I did keep a relationship with her because she was, for all her faults, I knew that she loved me unconditionally in sort of a childlike way. I knew that she would cover for me and protect me, which she did when I was a teenager. I became an alcoholic as well, and if I threw up all over my bed at my father's, I would simply put it in a trash bag, drive to my mother's house, and she would wash it. No questions asked. She too has her own issues, and maybe it's generational, maybe it's cultural. She does not wish to work on them. But I love my mother. I love her very much. I accept her as someone who did the best she can with the tools that she had at the time.
But that doesn't happen until you deal with those issues. I'm
Correct.
curious, Maria, how do those early years impact not only your education and career choices, you are a lawyer, but your choice of a husband.
Oh my gosh,
Because
so
in
much
my
so.
experiences, those early years define who you are professionally and who you marry. And it is not until many years later, after 50, that we look back and say, oh my God, it was so obvious. So tell us for you how that impacted your career, your education, and your choice of a husband.
Well, first of all, my mom, as an immigrant to this country, told me from a very early age that I would become a doctor or a lawyer. That's it. There were no other options for me. I was very, very good at school because I escaped the insanity of my household by reading books. I got straight A's for most of my life until I got to a top 10 law school where the competition was greater. And then I rode that Be Mean at the University of Virginia School of Law. But I got straight A's without that much effort because it was an escape for me.
Did you feel a burden? A
To become a lawyer?
responsibility. Well, the responsibility to and maybe I'm projecting here
Mhm.
because my mother, also an immigrant, first generation Italian, when I was 13, said she was not formally educated, but very bright. I've been listening to the radio, and I used to tell you how to be a teacher or nurse, but now girls become lawyers. You're not very good in science, so you have to go to law school, and you could help our family because we were poor. And I felt a tremendous burden. I don't resent it. I'm proud of it. It turned out pretty well for me, but I felt that responsibility and that burden to my mother and my family. Did that happen to you?
Well, in a way, my father never finished college. He didn't really care. As long as I was quiet, actually, he would be fine. I mean, he would get drunk, and when I was a teenager, I would find him in the living room, drunk, listening to Barbara Streisand in the dark. I will come in from being out with my friends, and he'd cry, Angeline, why did you leave me? And I would say, Dad, I am not Angeline. I am your daughter. I would run up to my room and lock the door. I was scared of him for most of my childhood. He never beat me like he beat my mom, in which I witnessed, but he was volatile. I was afraid. He was very unpredictable. So, as an adult and young adult and child, I became hyper vigilant and maybe even empathic because I had to assess his temperament almost any time I saw him to see how quiet did I have to be? How did I have to behave in this situation? And maybe that inured to my benefit as an adult because I am very good with difficult clients because I know how to assess people's temperaments and let them talk and just be a really good listener and not make waves. I know how to do all that. So I view a lot of the things that happened in my childhood as actually being gifts that equipped me for my path in life. Another very, very difficult thing that happened to me in childhood is my mother remarried when I was, well, shortly after leaving my father. She was involved with, or contemporaneously with the end of her marriage, she started a relationship with a man who became my stepfather 2 years later after the divorce was final. So I was very young, 7, and I was sexually abused by this man. And I didn't even know what it was. I had no idea what he was doing. I just knew I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. But it turns out, I found out years later, I did tell my younger stepbrother. I would ask him if we could make forts under the ping pong table when I visited there so that his dad wouldn't come into my room. So I didn't know what to do with that. But ultimately, when I entered adolescence, I figured out what was happening and then just learned to steer clear of this man at any cost. I just didn't tell anyone.
Well, you didn't have the language.
Yeah.
When we don't know what's happening, we don't have the language. But isn't it interesting? Instinctively, you know to steer clear and to hide, and you instinctively know shame. When did you develop the language to talk about it in a way that could help you heal?
Well, because I had a lot of anxiety that I didn't know how to deal with other than by drinking it down, which helped me, I suppose, in some sense for parts of my life. I anesthetized through being extremely busy at all times, hyper social, and never being introspective. And then in my 20s, one friend got through to me and asked me, my roommate in law school, asked me why I kept running so fast all the time. I was the organizer, connector, the tried to be the life of the party or the organizer of any event if possible because I hated looking inside of myself. I knew that the darkness in there, if anyone knew what I had done, what I was like, that everyone would run away from me. I didn't want anyone in college or law school to know that my father had been arrested. I didn't even know anyone whose father had been arrested until later in life. And so I was ashamed of my childhood. And I tried to reinvent myself over and over again and just be a people pleaser in any way possible. And so this friend got through to me in just talking to me with gentleness and love and asked why Maria, won't you stop running? And so I told her. And this was at age 22. I asked her not to tell anyone, and then she convinced me to go to a therapist, Western therapist, which did help. But I married a man I met in law school who was probably the first nice guy I ever dated. And I looked at him as a potential, I don't know, savior, I guess, someone who could give me stability, someone who would make an excellent father, seemed like he came from a stable household. He was funny and smart and seemed to really love me. And we were very different. I still don't know why he married me.
But I have a question for you. This is, fascinating to me because although very different, not dissimilar to my journey, because when you experience shame as a young person, and I did also, it just never leaves you. And until you have the language to speak about it as you speak about it, as I speak about it, you experience it. So with your husband, because I was raised by a father who was mentally ill and broken, I married somebody who on the surface was the opposite,
Hmm.
a physician, came from what I thought was a nice family. They had a house and jobs,
Yeah.
to me, that was nice. But I realized, and it took me many, many years to realize that people come in different packages.
Hmm.
Underneath the surface of the trappings of education and a home and what I perceive stability was the same kind of self destructive mental illness in my husband. And it broke my heart when I realized that although the outwardness was very different, underneath it, I was attracted to that which I was raised by.
Sure.
Did you have that experience?
In in a way, yes. I mean, in my family, the dysfunction was pretty much on display for everyone to see. In my then husband's family, he grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, to a family that was very proper, if you know what I'm talking about, among
Yes.
Southern families. And so their dysfunction was under the table. It was
Yes.
there, but it was
Yes.
hidden. And it took us a few years to unpack just how broken his family was too. I believe that if one is not willing to unpack how their childhood may still be affecting their relationships in adulthood, then you stay stuck in the cycle. And I still love my ex-husband like a brother, not in a romantic way, and so I will not say anything negative about him because he is a good man. We were just not good for each other.
As the
And
marriage evolved,
mm,
you've mentioned publicly that you had an alcohol problem.
yes,
Tell
and
us
that
about that.
led to the demise of our marriage. At a certain point, when I became an empty nester, just before I had children, I was a political appointee in the Clinton administration. I worked in one of the biggest law firms in DC. I felt like I had achieved everything my mother wanted for me. And maybe I thought that was what I wanted for myself too, but it really wasn't. It was sort of an empty victory to get to where I had gotten in life, making a lot of money, doing things that I thought were good for the country and for myself and my clients. And so I willingly became an at-home mom because I had been a latchkey kid. So I wanted to be a June cleaver to my children, whatever that meant in their childhood. So I wanted to be at every single school event because my mother came to nothing, and it hurt me. And I had to go to Catholic church by myself or with my brother for my whole childhood among those huge Irish Catholic and Italian Catholic families and feel like a freak, not only because my parents were divorced and excommunicated, which was the way in the 60s, But because I was the only brown kid in the white school in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, and I felt like a freak. So I wanted to be the best mother I could be in the way it was depicted in the common media. So I gave up willingly my legal career, and I feel very privileged to have been able to do that. I was an excellent mother of children before they became teenagers. When they became teenagers, I was so triggered with all my childhood stuff I had never really taken care of. I became overprotective, which made them push me away because I believe that as parents, our job is to give our children wings, to make it so they actually don't need us anymore. And I did that, but it hurt. It hurt a lot.
Because you try to parent in a way to address the things you didn't get.
Yes,
And sometimes that's not the healthiest way to parent.
right.
But I think as you get older, and I'm sure as your children get older, they will understand, as we understand about our parents, they did the best they could based upon how they were raised.
Pat, I hope so. I hope so because they are in their 20s right now. I don't know that they get that right yet, but I hope
My daughters
they
are in their
will.
20s and 30s, and I believe they get that because they understand my parenting was based upon my own history. But when did you get to a point, Maria, where you said, I really need to look at all of this? Was that as you approached 50?
It
Because
was.
it's a lot to unpack.
It was.
And my question to you is, what is it? Why is it, do you believe, that we're so unable to look at that pain, that trauma, that which shapes us until we reach a certain age? Because I had the exact same experience. So why do you think that is?
Well, I believe that it should be taught in schools how to tolerate discomfort. Because what we are taught in our society is to, well, in our generation, you forge forward. Whatever happens, you just keep going. But even in this generation, we're not taught how to tolerate discomfort. And that is such an important life skill. I was unwilling to look at the darkness because it was too painful. And I didn't feel like there was anyone who could understand the big T and little t traumas that I had gone through because I was still mired in shame. So at age 49, when my then husband started finding all the bottles I was hiding around the house because I was anesthetizing from feeling rejected by my children and had given up my career, I felt totally rudderless. So he started finding bottles. He gave me an ultimatum to go to rehab or get out, or go to AA or get out. And so I went to AA, but I was still full of shame. I sat outside the AA meeting near my house for many days until I saw people going in who I knew from my church, my kids' schools, my childhood. So I ventured in and I found a new way of living. I actually went to rehab. My then husband thought it was really necessary. I didn't want to get divorced because I was so scarred from the divorce of my parents, even though I probably should have asked for a separation. I didn't want to do it. I was unwilling to pull the trigger because I was still scarred. And so my husband sent me to rehab. And at the very first rehab for alcoholism, the therapist said, Maria, until you deal with your sexual abuse and
Ah.
assault, you will not get sober. You have to work on that issue first.
I want to go back to something you
Yeah.
said, Maria. You said we need to teach younger people how to tolerate discomfort. How do we do that? How do we possibly introduce that? Because many families, primary families, avoid discomfort.
Yes.
I know growing up, we were not permitted to talk about shameful things. We had to stuff them down and hide them. As I've said, I don't think I talked about shameful things in my life until I was, I don't know, maybe it was when my parents died, and that wasn't too many years ago. So, how is it that we could teach people to tolerate discomfort or to say it's okay? Because one of the things is as we get older and we look back, and I have many friends from childhood, you realize they had their own discomfort.
Mm.
How do we teach young people to tolerate discomfort?
Well, I think there is a lot more awareness about mental health because if you don't deal with your big T and little t traumas, you will suffer mental health consequences. And now science is showing it manifests physically as well. I think there's a much more awareness now about being introspective, and modalities such as meditation is even being taught in some schools, and healthcare providers such as Reiki masters who deal with energy is being covered by some healthcare providers. So there is increasing awareness about how trauma is stored in your body if you don't get it out in some way, if you don't process and integrate the challenges in your life. So I think it's a matter of awareness and creating safe spaces for children, people, humans to discuss that which still hurts them. To allow spaces for people to speak candidly about what is keeping them mired in shame or guilt or doubt, just to open channels for people to be heard. And then the skill set should be taught by healthcare providers, mental health professionals about how to ride waves of discomfort, to look at what happened, what you're feeling, question it. Is it accurate or is it a story you're telling yourself? How to talk back to negativity in your head, because I have plenty of negativity still, but now I know that I can question it, I can feel it, not push it away or tamp it down with over busyness or whatever it is, eating chocolate, whatever I do to get out of my head, but rather to look at it unflinchingly, question it. Is it real? Is it still applicable? Is it something I can change? And just feel the feelings. Don't deny the feelings, feel the feelings, but then intentionally turn from that and do what you can change.
So at 49, you realize if I don't address this childhood, young adult trauma, these issues, I am not going to evolve in a way that is going to be productive and healthy. Is that what inspires 50 after 50, reframing the next chapter of your life?
It
And
is.
talk to us about what inspired that, and talk to us about the tools that you've developed and you write about to confront those issues.
Well, I am someone who has journaled for most of my life and written for lots of publications. I use writing as a means of processing what's happening in my life. And I decided, well, first, and I used to have humongous birthday parties for myself. For my 40th birthday party, I had 200 people. My then husband made me get the list from 1,000 people down to 200 people. And the theme was all about Maria. Honestly, it was. I was really out there. I had trivia questions about myself. I had people dress in costumes or garb from the decade in which they met me. I had costume changes for every decade of my life.
Some people might think that was a little self-serving
It was.
or narcissistic.
It absolutely was.
So what was that about?
That was about trying to create a persona for myself that I could be comfortable with. And so if I could be popular, if I could be the life of the party, if I could be out there, if people could be talking about me, then I would feel better about myself. I was seeking outside affirmation as a barometer of my own self-worth, which I
And it
don't do
didn't work.
anymore.
And it
It
didn't
didn't work. It didn't work. So for 50, I was then separated. Was sober. I feel like I had blown up my life. We sent my son to boarding school. My daughter went off to college. In AA, they teach us that you have to change almost everything about your life to remain sober. The analogy used is if you take a diseased plant out, get it healthy, you don't put it back into the diseased soil. So I felt that I had to change everything about my life. And so at age 50, I had a very quiet celebration.
Mm.
I just went away with a couple of trusted girlfriends for a weekend away. But as a gift to myself for my 50th birthday, I decided to try 50 new things to determine how I wanted to live the next chapter of my life. I didn't intend to turn it into a book, but so many people asked me for the list that I decided it might make a good book. It might provide me another opportunity for processing, and it might help others.
Let's talk about some of the 50 new things that
Wow.
you talk about in 50 After 50.
Well, the most drastic thing I did that most people won't want to do is I sold most of my belongings, put the rest in storage or donated them, and I moved to Nepal. And I volunteered in the poorest region of Nepal. I lived with a family that had no running water, no electricity, used an outhouse for a couple months. These children were the happiest people I had ever met in my life, and they were the poorest children I had ever met in my life. And they taught me what was really important and to focus not on all that I had lost, but on all that I had. And when I came back to the US, I was a changed person. I would go into a casual restaurant and I was in the bathroom right when I returned, and I can't believe I said this out loud, but I was like, "Oh my god, paper towels! It smells so good in here!" And people quickly ran out of the bathroom. There's a crazy woman in there. But I am so appreciative now of clean water, of the fact that even if I'm homeless, I can still get medical care in this country. So it reset my life. I also did all kinds of social activities, physical challenges, spiritual endeavors, thrill-seeking ventures, and lifestyle changes. So for instance, a lifestyle change would be I am practicing my own brand of minimalism now. For every one thing I bring into my home, I get rid of, donate, or sell two things because I don't want my kids to be saddled with stuff when I die, which is what happened when my dad died and when my stepfather died.
Maria, it's interesting. My older daughter is a director of a nursing home in Alexandria, Virginia, and she says to me on a regular basis, at the end of the day, nobody wants your stuff. She said, 'cause she meets with families every day that have lots of stuff and their parents are in assisted living or Alzheimer's treatment. She said, nobody, at the end of the day, I've never met a family who wants their stuff. Stuff
Yeah.
doesn't matter. That's a very hard thing for us to understand. Tell me what
Right.
else you practice. Minimalism, what else?
Well, intentionality was really important to me, meditation. I had dabbled in meditation before, but I really developed a meditation practice. And for me, it doesn't require an hour long sitting in lotus position. For me, I could build meditation in throughout my day. I take a deep cleansing breath. Before I came on this podcast, I focused on my breath. Before I meet with a client, I focused on my breath because when you are fully focused on your breath, you cannot simultaneously be worrying about the future or fretting about the past. It allows me to be fully present. I did a few kooky things that my kids were embarrassed about. Like I bought a motorcycle, took motorcycle driving classes, and learned how to ride. And my kids were like, "You did what, mom?" And I said, "Look, you can get a motorcycle in your 50s too. Don't do it now. It's very dangerous." But it made me feel kind of badass, and I liked the feeling. And I'm also only 4'11". So I took motorcycle lessons at a Harley Davidson dealership, and I was in there with these grizzled, tattooed men who looked at me with such disdain, like, "What are you doing here, soccer mom?" And I passed with flying colors. We, as a group, well, some guys didn't pass, and we went to the DMV, the motor vehicles place, and we all got our licenses together, and it was a great freeing experience that I could do something that scared me a little bit, but
As
I
you
could
went
do it.
as you went through each of these challenges or experiences, did you feel sort of the burden of your childhood lifting?
Yes, I
Like
did.
almost it evaporate does it evaporate? Because it's so interesting to me when I read your book and I read about you. One of the things that I'm curious about is I think when you make this kind of decisions, I'm wondering what anchored you to the past that led you to be free for the future. And I'm projecting here because for me, my anchor was my sister, my brother, my daughters who were adopted, who I always say saved my life, and joining my law firm at age 23, 44 years ago. So I had these anchors that allowed me to deal with my past in a way that freed me from my past. And I'm wondering, did you need anchors to move forward? I did. I don't know if you did.
Well, sure, we all need, I believe, connection. We all need trusted people to bear witness to our life experience and
Yes.
the challenges we go through. I was lucky because I was in 2 12-step programs. I also joined Al-Anon for people in relationship with people who are addicts or in dysfunctional relationships even. And so I had sponsors, trusted sponsors that I could bounce things off of and who could check me when I got a little bit impulsive. That's something I deal with myself. I had a group. I mean, the 12-step programs, and there are many different kinds of 12-step programs and other support groups. I had support groups that I could feel supported by. For my whole life, I have felt very alone, that there wasn't any one human I could trust because I felt that the trusted humans in my childhood let me down, that they were not people I could trust. So I've been very self-sufficient in my life. I did have a Western therapist, and now I have a somatic healer that has helped me move to another level of healing. So I draw from lots of modalities, but I believe that I'm pretty self-sufficient, especially in the last 10 years.
How many years did it take you after 50 to peel away these layers as you entered these new adventures? Did you ever get to a point where you felt we're never healed, but we could accept our history and view it as a strength?
Well, I would say at age 50, with all the work that I did in earnest to try to get sober, to try to live my amends to my children for having broken up their family of origin, I did a lot of work, lots of retreats, lots of reflection, lots of healing modalities. I felt like I met a certain level of healing at that point. But this is a lifelong venture for me. It is progress, not perfection. I love the metaphor of we carry around a backpack full of rocks, and that as we age, we are able to unpack it and let go of some of those rocks. And I feel like now that I'm 60, I have let go of almost all of those rocks. Some of them creep back into the bag, but I am more aware and conscious, and I have more tools now. So I'm actually writing 60 After 60, Finding Serenity in Your 60s, to talk about the 60 things I did in my 60th year and what they taught me, because I want to keep learning for the rest of my life for as long as I am able. I do not want to live a static life. I want to keep growing.
And what I hear you saying, and I think it's such a, it's a simple message, but it's powerful. Shame, shame will destroy us. The great poet Maya Angelou has a wonderful saying that, when you know better, you do better. I've often said that that statement in its entirety has literally gotten me out of bed sometimes in the morning when my shame or my thoughts about things in the past have debilitated me. And it becomes very liberating to understand that it's okay. It doesn't have to control you. So at 60, because at the end of the day, this show is about hope and speaking to you is extremely hopeful. At 60, looking forward, how do you think that's going to impact your podcast becoming your best version? And how do you think that's going to differ from your stories in 50 After 50?
That's a great question. As I said, I am a lifelong learner. And I truly believe that every situation and person has a capacity to teach us something if we're open to the lesson. And I've worked really hard to be open to the lessons of, especially of challenges. I'm going to have challenges for the rest of my life. It's the human condition. But I now am able to step back and ask myself, what's the potential lesson here? And do better the next time, much like the Maya Angelou quote that you just mentioned. So I believe in my 60th decade that I am more calm, less reactive, more able to see why others might behave in the way that they behave, and to practice more forgiveness, because not everyone chooses to heal. And that used to really irk me. I went through actually a terrible time at Christmas because I wanted the people closest to me to do some work to change, and no one wanted to. So I went away. I lived in Istanbul for 7 weeks, and it helped to reset me. And sometimes I need to get away from my everyday life in order to reflect on what my part is in what might be going wrong, because I realize I can change no one but me. I can set a good example. Someone might ask me, what am I doing that has changed me, or ask me for resources. And I sincerely hope that my children one day read my books and listen to my podcast or read
Well,
my articles, but I don't think they will. Maybe
well,
they will.
they will one day, but you raise a very interesting point. Although certainly things happened to you, at the end of the day, we have to accept responsibility for our placement in those situations. Not that anyone should be victimized, but at some point you have to accept responsibility that this happened and I have to process it. And being a perpetual victim and not dealing with it is not going to heal us.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that doesn't happen until you're a certain age. So, Maria Leonard Olsen, I am so looking forward to reading 60 After 60. I urge our listeners to read 50 After 50 and to tune into your podcast, Becoming Your Best Version. I think our conversations will continue, and I look forward to hearing more about what you say. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for what you put out in the world. It brings me light and joy to hear your guests, and to have had you on my podcast was one of the best ones I've ever had. You are truly authentic, and I
Okay.
love meeting people like you. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Please give us a 5-star rating and leave a review so more people can listen in to Heartbreak and Hope with Pat Barbarito.